So what I found was that the Indian worldview, which is rooted in unity but also diversity, and this acceptance of, natural acceptance of a certain amount of spiritual freedom to choose one's path. Even in historical India, early India, there were even atheistic schools. There were a couple, not too many, and they did not really flourish. But for a while, there were schools of complete atheism, like the Charvakas, for example, which denied the existence of any consciousness outside our body, and therefore, once you die, it's all over. I think the biggest civilizational issues that not only India but the whole world is facing at present are two. One is coexistence, and two, our relationship with nature, because once again we've been destroying nature at a very rapid pace.
We would really like to know, despite so many Westerners getting attracted to Indian spirituality, why is there so much negative news about Indian in foreign media related to violence, poverty, exploitment, unemployment, etc.?
Maybe there is a subconscious continuation of the colonial complex, first of all. That is one factor. There are others. Colonial complex in the sense that, the white man during the colonial era was the superior race and superior gender, of course, and therefore all other civilizations were inferior and had to be, brought up to the level of the white race. Rudyard Kipling's famous white man's burden and so on.
Namaste, sir. We welcome you here on behalf of IKS Club Indus University. Myself, Rupal Shrira, and I'm studying in CSE branch. We all were eagerly waiting for this day to have this opportunity to interact with you. Since we have you here, it would be great for us if you answer our few questions. So, with your due permission, can we proceed the conversation? So, my first question is, we came to know that you are from France and you came to India almost several decades back. So, we are very curious to know about your journey to India. Can you please tell us something about yourself? Where did you pursue your education from, and how and when did you know about India?
So it's a slightly longish story, but I'll make it brief. I can't explain why I became fascinated with India and some aspects of Indian thought and spirituality, but it happened very early on when I was about 16. And, very soon I decided that I would like to spend my life here. So circumstances happened and it became possible when I was about 21. So it was a very conscious decision. That's all I can say. So if you don't mind, you are Indians by accident perhaps, but I'm Indian by choice. That's what it boils down to.
Namaste, sir. My name is Kshitij Pandey. I am studying in Indus University from CSE branch. I would like to I would like to know about when did you decide to settle down in India permanently and not going back home?
Well, as I said, it happened when I first came to India. So that was in 1977. And I think the exact circumstances do not matter, but it received kind of confirmation of my earlier desire when I was still a teenager in France. And, it's not that I was not particularly a rebel. I was not, I did not have any negative thoughts about my country of origin, France. I mean, it has its own greatness and its own fine points. But I found that there was something missing there in basically what you might call the European or the Western culture, which had been, at the root of preoccupations in India for a long time, with many Indian thinkers, philosophers, spiritual figures, and this is what I wanted to explore. So that decision was very soon taken.
Namaste, sir. My name is Dhruv Akharia, and I am studying in Indus University in CSE branch. So, one of my questions was what fascinates someone seeker like you from the West about Indian culture and philosophy?
So I think part of the answer is actually in my presentation, in the sense that the whole approach uh, that India followed and many schools of thought, schools of belief, all kinds of figures. The whole approach is very, very different from the Western approach, which is basically rooted in Judeo-Christian thought and belief systems. It's extremely different. The whole concept of the universe, you might say, the world view, is very deeply different. We don't realize that often. We are kind of blinded by certain slogans, like all religions are the same, etc. It's not actually true. And philosophical systems differ a lot. Even within India, we already know that there's a lot of diversity. However, there is also a kind of common trunk and common sense of origins. So what I found was that the Indian worldview, which is rooted in unity but also diversity, and this acceptance of, natural acceptance of a certain amount of spiritual freedom to choose one's path. Even in historical India, early India, there were even atheistic schools. There were a couple, not too many, and they did not really flourish. But for a while, there were schools of complete atheism, like the Charvakas, for example, which denied the existence of any consciousness outside our body, and therefore, once you die, it's all over. So even that was okay. I mean, they were not persecuted in any way by other schools. It was considered natural that we can, and there were lots of debates among all these schools. In fact, there's a whole intellectual tradition of debating and argument in India, which was very rich. So all this to me is something very valuable because it allows for coexistence basically, and that's what the world needs. All these wars and constant destruction. Yeah, there's been, as I said, there's been a lot of warfare in historical India, no doubt about it. But this was almost always for political reasons, conquest, mutual conquest and dominance of one kingdom over another typically. But by and large, the common population was spared. Well, there were some abuse here and there, but by and large, the code of conduct was that the common people should not suffer from this warfare, and also you find that it was not about culture. If you read, for example, Arthashastra, Kautilya is supposed to be a master strategist of warfare. But what he says is that when a king conquers a neighboring kingdom, what is the first thing he should do? Not crush the population, not impose exactly the opposite. He says the conquering king should go to the temples of the conquered kingdom and worship there, should adopt the customs, should adopt the dresses, should adopt the language I don't exactly remember. But he has a whole set of recommendations on how the conquering king should make himself accepted to the conquered population culturally, you see. So the cultural phenomenon and stream is very, very distinct from the political phenomenon and stream. So therefore the worldview is different, and the way also human beings not only should relate to each other, but also should relate to the whole creation, as I showed the natural world, ultimately the whole universe. So this is something which to me was much more satisfying than what I found in the Western world. It's ultimately a matter of personal choice. That's all.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening us of the diversity that was and still is in India. Thank you, sir.
Can you name a few Indian scholars who have inspired you in your civilizational as well as spiritual journey of India?
Well, it depends what period you are looking at, because the ancient rishis, ancient thinkers are a constant source of inspiration. But towards a more contemporary period, as a teenager, I started reading some of the great spiritual masters. We are a bit deceived by this word spiritual, because it's not as if they are cutting you off from life. It's not as if they are asking you to take sannyas. You can take sannyas if you want, but it's not. There's no compulsion either. So among those I started reading when I was probably 16, there were people like Sri Ramakrishna, his foremost disciple, Swami Vivekananda, and then a lot of others. But I soon found Sri Aurobindo's philosophy exactly what I was looking for. Again, it's a matter of personal choice and inclinations. Different people are looking for different things, and also it's not as if there's a single path to finding fulfillment. There are infinite numbers of paths, which is why in India you've had an infinite number of teachers. And you can yourself become, if you want tomorrow, a spiritual teacher and start a new school of thought. Nobody will prevent you. Nobody will laugh at you. It all depends whether, ultimately the society accepts or recognizes. There are all kinds of strange, phenomena. The other day I was traveling in Tamil Nadu and passing through a place where a school teacher one day had a dream from a goddess that he had to create a temple there. That school teacher has created an enormous sect in the last 20 years with millions and millions of followers. And in fact, his adopted name as a school teacher is Amma. Amma is how the devotees started calling him, because it was all inspired from that dream of a goddess saying you build a temple there. So it's open-ended, and basically it's for you to decide what you want. But my choices were ultimately made, and I thought I would study more deeply Sri Aurobindo and his immense contributions, not only to philosophy and spirituality, but also to understanding Indian civilization, because he studied Indian civilization in depth, and he was deeply interested in history. Archaeology was not still very popular in his days, but actually this led me to a slightly different approach towards Indian ancient history, the roots of Indian civilizations, because he was very deeply interested in understanding and explaining those roots. So these were some of my choices.
What are the civilizational issues India has right now, and how, as a youth, we can bring awareness to our surroundings.
I think the biggest civilizational issues that not only India but the whole world is facing at present are two. One is coexistence. Are we going to destroy each other more and more? War has been multiplying. There are so many small wars, localized wars across the world. So why is that? And what's the solution to that? That is one. And two, our relationship with nature. Because once again, we've been destroying nature at a very rapid pace. Not even 300 years of industrial revolution, and the climate has changed like it has not changed in the last 10,000 years. So it's extremely rapid. The pace of environmental change, the geological of the earth is incredibly rapid. It's like the blink of an eye on the scale of the planet. So we still do not really understand in what ways we have altered all these natural cycles because we don't know all of them. I mean, our science is very advanced perhaps, but it's still very ignorant in many ways. So therefore, to me, these are the two big civilizational issues that humanity as a whole is going to be confronted with increasingly in this 21st century. And I think my presentation attempted to suggest that, well, India has dealt with these questions in its own ways in the past. And for coexistence, it has given its verdict that we can easily coexist because we have different paths. See, Ashoka, in fact, has Ashoka left a number of inscriptions. They are called edicts. Now, in edict number 12, maybe, I forget the exact number because they are numbered by the scholars. He gave this recipe for coexistence, especially religious coexistence. Actually, the word religion does not exist. The word which exists is sect, because there were many, many sects in his time, and there were occasional rivalries. So he said for all these sects to coexist peacefully, you should never praise too highly your own sect. Your own beliefs, don't praise them too highly. That means don't be a fanatic of your own belief system. You have it, you are free, you're happy with it, fine. But don't go overboard about it. Don't try to convert others to it, in other words. Secondly, he said, one should study the belief system of other sects. You see, which we don't do. So, and then one should respect also those belief systems. Now, it's a very simple recipe for coexistence at the level of belief systems or religious sects, though again the word religious does not exactly exist. And even that, after 2,200 years, we're not able to practice it worldwide. So I think that there are, I won't say solutions, but approaches, roads that India has charted. And for both this issue as well as the issue of our relationship with nature, there are keys there that humanity can study. And in fact, you find a number of Western thinkers who are studying Indian thought systems because they find a lot of inspiration there. That's my brief answer.
We would really like to know, despite so many Westerners getting attracted to Indian spirituality, why is there so much negative news about Indian in foreign media related to violence, poverty, exploitment, unemployment, etc.?
You know, maybe there is a subconscious continuation of the colonial complex, first of all. That is one factor. There are others. Colonial complex in the sense that, the white man during the colonial era was the superior race and superior gender, of course, and therefore all other civilizations were inferior and had to be, brought up to the level of the white race. Rudyard Kipling's famous white man's burden and so on. So I believe, first of all, there is a kind of subconscious continuation of this, that the West is somehow superior. And on the surface of it, the Western countries and cities and so on are very impressive. It's very easy when you walk through Indian cities to find a lot of garbage, a lot of ugly buildings, a lot of chaotic traffic and whatnot. But this is just the surface, the appearances. Why are they not also portraying the more positive aspects of India? Perhaps because they are also not able to understand them. You see, there's a cultural distance which requires a little bit of effort. And here India also has not helped, because India also failed after independence to propagate its genuine heritage. I'm not saying, glorify itself unnecessarily, but there's so much of great value which was left out of the educational system, out of the intellectual horizon, and this kind of subservience to Western thought and Western approaches continued in many ways. So even in the scientific world, I've heard many Indian scientists complain that, we are afraid of establishing our own schools of science. We still keep, in mathematics, we keep aligning ourselves to the French School of Mathematics or to the American School of Mathematics. We have not created an Indian School of Mathematics. Even a few days ago, one brilliant Indian mathematician was telling me this. So there is also this kind of, decolonization process which has not fully happened in India, partly, but not fully. But decolonization should happen together with a proper understanding of what India can contribute and how much leadership in thought it should look for. And this is where independent India to a large extent has failed. You see, we have a lot of fine Indian thinkers, but not what really was in the ancient world, where you find that India was really not only a thought leader, but a thought creator, you see. So we are still afraid of creating. And this is one issue that, so naturally the Western media has its prejudices, but also, tends to copy the English educated Indian elite and English medium media, and that also it's a vicious circle. You see, that also keeps repeating the stereotypes that we inherit from the colonial times. So it's a complex phenomenon.
Do you think this is a contradiction or a paradox that, in general, Indian youth is more fascinated by all Western ideas and culture rather than taking interest in Indian culture? And how do you see this paradox?
Well, as I was just saying, the paradox is in a way a continuation of the colonial period. And decolonization is a very difficult, complex phenomenon. It cannot happen out of arbitrary decisions. You have, first of all, to recreate a certain rootedness in Indian concepts and knowledge wherever it is relevant to the modern context. That takes time and effort. It did not happen after Indian independence. The educational system, for example, was not reformed. It was just a continuation of the British system. In fact, it got even much worse. It did not improve. On the contrary, kind of suppressed the students' right to think independently, to think critically. So this was critical thought, independent thought, original thought was actually discouraged by the educational system because of all kinds of factors which we need not go into. So therefore the whole task is, first of all, to make Indians aware of not only for historical reasons, not just to know that, okay, once upon a time we were a great nation. That's not the point. It's because we have issues to solve. We have a lot of social problems to solve. Nobody denies that Indian society is full of problems, right? How do we solve them? Are we going to borrow some sociological solutions designed in, some Western university? How will it help us? So first of all, if you want to solve these issues, and issues are compounded also by the very large population, you have to really understand how Indian society works. And therefore, there's a whole program that should unfold, which so far has not really taken off. That's the difficulty.
Thank you, sir, for the clarification.
Sir, what best educational system, what best educational practice we can adopt from the traditional education system?
So I would say two, definitely two. And if you read again those Chinese pilgrims who came to India and how they describe the Nalanda University, for example, but also a lot of Indian texts directly, you will see that there were two things that, of course, the students were expected to learn, naturally a lot of things, but there were two major differences. One was the importance of letting the student develop his or her personality and independent thought. So there was a lot of importance given to the student questioning, for example. It was not supposed, education was not supposed to be a monologue from a teacher to a student. It was a dialogue. And the second point is precisely dialogue, debating. So you will see that, for example, at admission, according to Swansong, students admitted to Nalanda University were interviewed. It's not a written exam that they had to pass and, MCQ kind of a thing. They were interviewed, they were thrown questions at. And only if the student could respond well, which means to think, first of all, were they admitted. And then there was this whole tradition of debate, which was not only among students, but also among scholars. You have a lot of historical debates, in the Upanishads between Yajnavalkya and Gargi, for example. Gargi was, of course, a woman, and she almost defeats him, but then he has so much pride as a male scholar that ultimately he puts her down. But anyway, the point is that the debating tradition was very, very strong. So you have debates between the Buddhists and the Vedantis, between all kinds of schools of thought, and instead of waging war, religious war, instead of that, you would have these debating confrontations, which sometimes could get a little intense, and sometimes there could be a little bit of excess here or there. But basically, if you were not able to establish the superiority of your philosophical system through logical arguments, and logic was a very, very important discipline in ancient India. It was called Nyaya. Today, Nyaya has a different connotation. Then basically you had lost the debate, and you had failed to establish the foundations of your school of thought. So these are important intakes. And finally, a third aspect which I forgot is again the all-round development of the student's personality. There were two aspects to education. One was outer knowledge and the other was inner knowledge. What is inner knowledge? It is ethics, building up a proper character, based on genuine values, and also ultimately developing one's spiritual side through yoga or any other methods. So this is mentioned in the text, and you can, if you put it all together, and we have some books on ancient Indian education, it becomes very, very clear. So this is something that ironically, we kind of lost somewhere during the colonial period. And now there are attempts, national education policy is one of them, to restore this, not only this rootedness, but this ability for the student to think independently, critically, challenge the instructor, and challenge other students, and create this kind of very vibrant intellectual life, which is basically missing from the present system.
So this is going to be our last question. So what would your message be for the youth? For
My message
yes,
for the youth, I don't have a message. You have all the messages in this, wealth of intellectual, artistic, scientific, technological, spiritual heritage. There are so many messages. I mean, the one message is try to grasp something out of all this wealth. Try to, this modern world is very impressive and also very compelling. Like there is a rat race. You have to get a job. You have to perform. You have to, if you are an academic, you have to publish, and so on and so forth. So it kind of absorbs you, and you lose sight of the deeper dimensions of life. And all human beings have a deeper dimension. All human beings have deeper needs. You can't be finally satisfied with having a fat paycheck at the end of the month, and then what are you going to do with all this? So there's something, maybe you're forced into the rat race, but also you can still keep a certain, depth behind you, and keep, thinking about life and the problems that humanity is facing, which are growing in intensity every day. And there you will find in this whole heritage, to call it simply, we can also call it knowledge systems of India, you will find a number of keys which can still be used provided you know how to adapt them, because they need to be adapted. You see, I am People say our tradition, our tradition. Actually, I'm not very fond of tradition because, first of all, people don't realize that tradition has always changed. Tradition has never been static in no culture. There are, of course, still some very ancient things in India, but many traditions are actually fairly recent, from the medieval times, perhaps. So, secondly, traditions cannot, themselves give you the knowledge. Very often, with tradition, you lose sight of the knowledge, on the contrary, and it becomes a kind of empty set of habits that you have to repeat mechanically. So that's not going to help us. You have to know how to get the spirit, the ancient spirit, and adapt it to new forms. That's the one big challenge. And I think I close with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Namaste, sir. My name is Pankaj Singh Chandel, a Indus University student from MBA branch. I have a question that having this vast civilization, why we are always taught about foreign invaders but not Indian rulers or the rulers from the motherland? So basically, I had been studied from my childhood that this ruler is from this country and he invaded India and whatever. But I had not learned about much more about kings like Ashok and many more.
Yeah, this is a problem with the teaching of history in India, that it has been giving too much emphasis on those invasions and not enough emphasis on what really happened within this land mass. But of course, at the university level, you have sometimes better courses and better professors also who know how to give emphasis to not only the rulers. Forget about the rulers. Of course, yes, we have to know all the different kingdoms, but there's so much more that happens outside of the concept of a kingdom and a ruler. There's so much of cultural life, so much of innovation that is not dependent on a ruler. So it's this richness of the whole society that has to be understood. For that, we will need a new approach to history. We will need new textbooks, but also new teachers. The teachers will have to relearn how to go about history and make it something really actually exciting. Whereas I was told by some students long back, when I conducted a small camp on history, I was told that, for us, history, the sleeping pill. This is what I was told by some students. So the whole approach has to change and be made much more lively, where you can see the whole life of the society unfolding, which you don't see at all in the current approach. So yeah, we have some more work on our hands.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir, I have one more question. There is always controversy behind the national language of India or the mother language of India. Recent in news, there was a controversy in the actors of Bollywood and Tollywood that Hindi is the mother language, and somebody is calling that it is not, and so the controversy behind is always in news. So, can you just tell us about this thing?
Well, it's true that India's problems are made more complex and difficult because of this diversity. Okay, whether it is ethnic, linguistic, or any sort of diversity. Sometimes, of course, religious and so on. So, linguistic diversity should be seen as an enrichment, not as a source of problem. The question is how to devise policies, especially at the educational level, but also at the level of how politicians communicate, how the bureaucracy communicates, how the courts communicate. At all levels, what are the best policies? Now, there have been commissions after commissions, committees after committees submitting reports, but the problem is that there are regional sensitivities. Everybody is proud about his or her language. It's natural, it's okay. But you see, the point is, first of all, what is missed is that many Indians are multilingual by nature. I suppose we have many people here who are fluent in Gujarati, Hindi, and I'm sure one or two other languages. In the South, it's very common to have someone who, even I found illiterate people knowing 4 or 5 languages. Illiterate. They could not read or write them. Okay? So this multilingualism, first of all, should be seen as a source of enrichment. And secondly, also they should not be, I believe there should not be any imposition. We should accept that all languages are rich, they have their own vast literature. But you know, we've been talking of national integration for 75 years now. And in Tamil Nadu, I ran a test asking them how many literary figures of the neighboring state of Kerala the average student is aware of. The answer is 0. Even for their own figures from Tamil Nadu, they will know 2-3 names, and even that very, very superficially. So we have again failed. It's the education system which has failed to show that, you know, I would like Tamil student to study some great Hindi poets. I would like also in North India that, you know, they are exposed to, if I say Tiruvalluvar to a North Indian average school, it draws a blank. But there's so much of great thought in his 1,330 verses, you know. Amazing thoughts, ethical, a lot about love, you know, and things like that which you would not suspect, about political, how a ruler should rule and so on. So the education system has completely failed to, and initially you can use translations if you like, but then at least, then it becomes a pretext to study the other language. So instead of saying you have to study Hindi, you don't say that. You say, okay, look at this wealth of literature in Hindi, you know, why don't you dip into it? So the whole philosophy has to be rethought, and again, not through imposition, because the moment you impose, some people are going to resist. And why should you impose? So linked language, to a large extent, Hindi works, but only in the north and central parts of India. I find even, you know, Bengali is sometimes rebelling against Hindi because they consider that Bengali is far superior to Hindi. You know, it's like that. So then, as long as, you know, we have worked out policies that satisfy enough people, English has to remain, and English will remain. Because, you know, some people say English now has become an Indian language. Why not? To some extent, you know. So let it remain, but it should not also stifle the study of regional languages as if English has a very high status, and if you don't know English, you are, you know, nobody. So that also should not be there. So it's a complex problem, not easy. And since independent India did not create a common language for all, so let us try to evolve something gradually, but as organically as possible. So the new, again, national education policy is not imposing any language. It says multilingualism and encouraging students to learn gradually up to 3 languages, plus, if desired, a classical language of India. Also, classical language can mean Sanskrit, or it can mean some Prakrit, or it can mean classical Tamil, classical Telugu, and so on. Anyway, so it's a big topic, but this new policy at least is trying to move towards more satisfying solutions without imposition.
Thank you, sir.
Namaste, sir. My name is Bharat Mepani. I am studying in Indus University in management branch. My question is how Indian civilization system is useful for corporate management.
Oh, that's a big question. I think there are more qualified people than me because I see a lot of workshops and speakers in India, and even occasionally in the West, you know, with the topics like Arthashastra and modern management, or Bhagavad Gita and management, or leadership, and so on and so forth. I'm not very, very strong on these topics because they've not been my concern. I don't know the corporate world very much, but one thing I do know is that the corporate world has severe issues of ethics. And they keep formulating ethical codes, you know, codes of ethics, business ethics. Now, in ancient Indian business, and business was very strong. I mentioned the guilds in passing, but there's a lot of textual sources, archaeological sources, inscriptions on, you know, don't forget that India was one of the leading business manufacturing powerhouses of the ancient world. With China, India and China altogether were having something like 60 to 70% of the world business once upon a time, before the colonial era, of course. So the irony is that there was no need to speak of business ethics. There was no concept of business ethics. Why? Because ethics was part of life and you had to apply it everywhere. So trust-based business, sometimes business without written agreements, self-respect, cooperation over competition, because the whole corporate world is very, very, very strong about, competing and sometimes defeating the competitor through unethical means, right? The Indian way of doing business was more emphasis on collaboration, hence the guilds, for example, So I'm not very, I cannot give you, a very structured solution, but I know that a lot of people are unsatisfied with the way the corporate world is working. For example, the way employees are often treated, or rather, I should say, mistreated, exploited, and so on. And there again, it's a matter of mutual respect and mutual collaboration. So there are people who've done a lot of work in this, and I think they say that they find solutions in the ancient text, literature, concept, and practices. So maybe you'll have to consult them more than myself.
Thank you, sir. Hello, sir. My name is Janav Dikshit. I am from Computer Engineering branch. Sir, I would like to ask a question for archaeology. I would like to ask, as many contemporary archaeologists claim that there has been a lack of research in the recent years in the field of archaeology. So, sir, can you provide some feedbacks related to that, considering that there has been a vast heritage of India? And sir, why are we not producing as earlier we did famous scholars like Aryabhatta and all in field of mathematics and technology?
I think you have two very different questions. I'll just deal with the first because the second is quite different and too big a topic. But, after independence, India was not a rich country, right? Even today, whether it's rich or not, well, at least it's much better in terms of average economic status than it was right after independence. It was a poor country. There were big issues of uplifting the poorest sections of the society. Archaeology was not a priority. It had been established by the British colonial rule. The Archaeological Survey of India was founded in 1861, maybe, and there had been already quite a bit of research. So we heard about the Harappan civilization being identified in 1924 and things like that. But again, India is too big, and slowly the even dimension of the richness of the material heritage, number of monuments, number of inscriptions. Even today, there is something like 1 lakh inscriptions lying with the Archaeological Survey of India and not being deciphered. Why? Because very few young people want to take the trouble of learning 10 languages and 20 scripts and getting a small paycheck at the end of the day. So the institutions did not grow in proportion with, and it's true also of other organizations, the Anthropological Survey of India and quite a few others, in fact. So it's just that it was not a sufficient, priority in the political horizon, and therefore inadequate resources were invested. And also, therefore, the profession of archaeologists did not really become something prestigious in the popular mind. Okay, most parents wanted their children to become engineers or doctors or something similar. Very few said, "Oh, I would like you to be an archaeologist." That was not usually the rule. So, there are many other issues related to also the fact that these institutions were not reformed. They continued on the old colonial structure, which served its purpose, but there should have been some real overhauling to modernize them, make them open to new scientific methods, new technologies. So it's happening, but very slowly. And here, in India, we are lagging behind the West. So there are many issues. It's not a simple problem, but these are some of my limited answers.